Rain pattered against the window panes of Mrs. Thornfield's modest lodging house in London, 1845, as Florence Osborne carefully folded her last decent dress into the small weathered trunk. The single room that had been her home these past months now looked barren, stripped of the few possessions she had managed to retain after her father's death had plunged her into genteel poverty. "You have references, girl?" Mrs. Thornfield asked from the doorway, her expression a mix of pity and practicality. "Yes," Florence replied, patting the envelope containing the carefully crafted letter from her former employer. What it failed to mention was how Florence had been dismissed when the master's son had taken an improper interest in her. She had fled rather than risk her reputation, but the whispers had followed nonetheless. A young woman without family protection was always suspect in the eyes of society. Florence straightened her spine. At 23, with no dowry and a name tarnished by her father's gambling debts, she had reconciled herself to a life of service. Love and marriage were luxuries afforded to those with fortune or beauty, preferably both, and she possessed neither in sufficient quantity to overcome her circumstances. "You're fortunate to secure a position at Fairwood Hall," Mrs. Thornfield continued. "The Duke of Fairwood is rarely in residence, I hear. You'll answer to the housekeeper mostly. Keep your head down, work diligently, and perhaps you'll rise to lady's maid one day." Florence nodded, though the thought of spending her life in service brought a familiar ache to her chest. Once, she had dreamed of a husband, children, a home of her own. Now, she measured success by whether she could keep a roof over her head and avoid the workhouse. "The carriage arrives at dawn," Mrs. Thornfield said, her voice softening. "Get some rest, child." After the landlady departed, Florence removed the locket from around her neck, the last gift from her mother before consumption had taken her. Inside was a miniature portrait of Florence as a child, her eyes bright with the innocent certainty that life would unfold as beautifully as the fairy tales her mother had read to her. "What a foolish girl you were," she whispered to her younger self as she closed the locket. "But at least you'll survive." Morning arrived with persistent rain and a carriage bearing the Fairwood crest. As Florence settled into the worn leather seat, she gazed at the crowded London streets receding behind her. She would not miss the city with its cruel judgments and whispering society matrons who had once welcomed her family into their drawing rooms but now pretended not to see her on the street. The journey to Hampshire was long, giving Florence ample time to rehearse the careful persona she had crafted, humble, efficient, invisible. It was safer that way. The one-spirited girl who had danced at society balls and debated literature in drawing rooms was buried beneath layers of disappointment and necessity. As the carriage crested a hill, Fairwood Hall came into view, an imposing manor house of weathered stone and countless windows, surrounded by gardens now glistening with rain. It was grander than Florence had imagined, making her feel smaller still. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, greeted Florence with a critical eye. "You'll be working primarily as a housemaid, though you may be called upon for other duties as needed. I understand you have experience as a companion." "Yes. I served Lady Pembroke for 2 years. Well, we'll see how you fare here. The Duke has particular standards." Florence followed Mrs. Winters through the servants' entrance and up narrow back staircases to a small room in the attics. The space was clean but sparse, a narrow bed, a washstand, a small chest of drawers. "You'll rise at 5. Breakfast for servants is at 5:30. You'll be assigned your duties each morning." Mrs. Winters paused at the door. "One more thing, Miss Osborne. The Duke has unexpectedly returned from London yesterday. He rarely speaks to the staff, but should he address you, you are to be respectful and brief in your responses." With that warning, Florence was left alone. She sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion weighing her limbs. Tomorrow would begin her new life, one step lower on the social ladder she had been descending since her father's death. The first week at Fairwood Hall passed in a blur of endless tasks, polishing silver, dusting ornate furniture, carrying coal for fires, and scrubbing floors until her hands were raw. Florence kept to herself, speaking only when necessary and taking her meals quickly before returning to work. She caught only glimpses of the Duke, a tall figure striding across the grounds or disappearing into the library. The staff whispered about him, Vincent Fairchild, 32 years of age, widowed 3 years prior. Some said he still mourned his wife, others claimed he had grown bitter and cold. On her 8th day at Fairwood Hall, Florence was assigned to clean the library, a task usually reserved for more senior staff. She entered cautiously, breathless at the sight of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. For a moment, she was transported back to her father's modest library, where she had spent countless hours lost in worlds beyond her own. Unable to resist, she ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles in multiple languages. She was so absorbed that she failed to notice the library door opening. "Are you searching for something specific, or merely admiring my collection?" Florence whirled around to find the Duke himself standing by the door, his expression unreadable. She dropped into a hasty curtsy, mortification heating her cheeks. "Your Grace!" "Forgive me. I was assigned to clean the library. I should not have touched your books." The Duke stepped further into the room. He was younger than she had expected, his features sharp but handsome, with dark hair and penetrating grey eyes that seemed to see through her carefully constructed facade. "You enjoy literature?" he asked, surprising her with the question. Florence hesitated. "Yes, Your Grace." "Which authors?" The question was a trap. To reveal too much education would raise suspicions about her background. To claim ignorance would be a lie. "I find value in many writers, Your Grace." "Shakespeare, naturally." "The poetry of Mr. Wordsworth." "And—" She faltered before adding truthfully, "I have a particular fondness for Mrs. Shelley's work." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps curiosity. Unusual tastes for a housemaid. "I was fortunate in my previous position to have access to books," she said carefully. "Indeed." He studied her for a long moment. "What is your name?" "Florence Osborne, Your Grace." He nodded slowly. "Continue your work, Miss Osborne. You may read any volume that interests you, provided your duties are completed first." With that, he departed, leaving Florence stunned by the unexpected permission. It was only later, as she finished dusting the massive desk, that she noticed a small book had been left open, a collection of Wordsworth's poems, marked that she was a phantom of delight. The following morning, Mrs. Winters approached Florence during breakfast. "The Duke requests that you attend to the arrangement of books he recently acquired from London. You are to report to the library after completing your morning duties." The announcement drew curious glances from the other servants. Such a task was unusual, particularly for a newcomer. When Florence entered the library that afternoon, the Duke was seated at his desk, writing letters. He looked up briefly. "Miss Osborne, the crates by the window contain my latest acquisitions. They need to be catalogued and shelved according to subject. I understand you can read." "Yes, Your Grace." "Good. You'll find my system explained in the ledger on the side table. Begin immediately." For the next several hours, Florence carefully unpacked volumes on history, science, and literature. The task was more pleasure than labor, though she maintained a properly servile demeanor whenever the Duke glanced in her direction. As dusk approached, he finally set aside his correspondence. "You work efficiently, Miss Osborne." "Thank you, Your Grace." He approached the shelves where she had been working, inspecting her organization. "You've arranged them precisely as I would have done myself." Florence kept her eyes lowered. "I simply followed the system in your ledger, sir. Few servants would have understood it so thoroughly." He paused, then asked, "You were not always in service, were you?" The question sent a chill through her. "I have served in various capacities, Your Grace." "That is not what I asked." Florence looked up then, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. "My circumstances have changed in recent years. I do what is necessary to survive." Something softened in his expression. "As do we all, Miss Osborne." He gestured to the remaining books. "You may continue this task tomorrow. You are dismissed for today." That night, Florence lay awake in her narrow bed, confused by the Duke's interest. She had worked so hard to become invisible, yet somehow he had seen through her carefully constructed persona. It was dangerous. If her true background became known, questions would follow, questions about why a gentleman's daughter was working as a housemaid rather than seeking a position as a governess or companion. Over the next fortnight, Florence spent each afternoon in the library, cataloguing books and occasionally being drawn into brief conversations with the Duke. He never asked directly about her past again, but his questions about literature and history revealed his suspicions about her education. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rumbled in the distance, the Duke entered the library to find Florence perched on a ladder, reaching for a high shelf. "Miss Osborne, that is hardly safe." She glanced down, startled by his sudden appearance, and lost her balance. The Duke moved swiftly, catching her before she could fall. For one breathless moment, she found herself cradled against his chest, close enough to detect the scent of sandalwood and ink that clung to him. "Forgive me," she whispered, regaining her footing and stepping away. "I thought myself alone." "Clearly." His voice held an unusual tension. "In the future, request assistance for such tasks." "Yes, Your Grace." He didn't immediately leave as she expected. Instead, he studied the volume she had been attempting to shelve, a rare edition of Paradise Lost. "You appreciate Milton." "I find his exploration of pride and fall quite relevant," she admitted. The Duke's lips curved slightly. "Indeed. Many of us have experienced our own expulsions from paradise." The personal nature of his comment surprised her, as did the momentary vulnerability in his expression. Before she could respond, Mrs. Winters appeared at the doorway. "Your Grace, Lord Pemberton has arrived." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters." He turned back to Florence. "We shall continue this discussion another time, Miss Osborne." That evening, Florence was summoned to the drawing room to serve tea to the Duke and his guest. Lord Pemberton was a florid man with small, shrewd eyes that assessed Florence in a manner that made her skin crawl. "New staff, Fairchild?" he asked as Florence poured the tea. "Recently hired, yes." "Pretty little thing. Unusual to find such refined features below stairs." Florence kept her expression blank, though shame heated her cheeks. She had endured such comments before, the assumption that a comely servant was available for certain gentlemen's entertainments. "Miss Osborne is quite valuable for her mind, not her appearance," the Duke said coolly. "She has been organizing my library with remarkable efficiency." Lord Pemberton chuckled. "Always the scholar. While you bury yourself in books, the rest of us pursue more tangible pleasures." "Indeed. How is Lady Pemberton?" "Still suffering from her mysterious ailments that keep her in the country while you enjoy London's diversions." The barbed question changed the subject effectively, but as Florence slipped from the room, she caught Lord Pemberton's parting comment, "You can't mourn Eliza forever, Fairchild. Society expects you to remarry." The Cunningham girl has quite the dowry, I hear, and her father is eager for a connection to your title. For the next 3 days, the Duke was absent from the library. Florence continued her work, trying to ignore the hollow feeling his absence created. She told herself it was merely disappointment at losing the intellectual stimulation of their brief exchanges, nothing more. On the 4th day, a commotion in the entrance hall drew the attention of the entire staff. Florence peered down from the gallery to see a grand carriage discharging visitors, an elegant older woman and a young lady dressed in the height of fashion. The Dowager Countess of Rothbury and her daughter, Lady Amelia, whispered Nancy, another housemaid. They say the Duke is considering Lady Amelia for his Duchess. Florence withdrew to the library, suddenly finding the task of cataloguing less enjoyable. Of course the Duke would remarry, duty to his title demanded heirs. The fact that this reality disturbed her was foolish in the extreme. Later that evening, as Florence carried linens through the long gallery, she overheard voices from the partially open door of the drawing-room. "She comes with £30,000, Vincent," came the Dowager Countess's voice. "And connections to some of the finest families in England. I am aware of Lady Amelia's credentials, Lady Rothbury." The Duke's voice sounded weary. "However, I have no interest in rushing into marriage simply to satisfy society's expectations. It has been 3 years since Eliza passed. A suitable mourning period by anyone's standards. You need an heir. What I need is not currently under discussion." Florence hurried past, knowing she should not eavesdrop, but her heart beat faster at the Duke's resistance to what was clearly a marriage negotiation. The following afternoon, Florence was summoned not to the library but to the Duke's private study, a smaller, more intimate room adjacent to his bedchamber. She entered with trepidation, finding him standing by the window, his profile limned in afternoon light. "Miss Osborne." He turned, his expression guarded. "I have a different task for you today." "Of course, Your Grace." He gestured to a stack of correspondence on his desk. "These letters require organization. Family correspondence, business matters, personal communications, all in disarray since my secretary took ill last month." Florence approached the desk cautiously. "You wish me to read your private letters, sir? I wish you to sort them by sender and date. The contents need not concern you beyond what is necessary for the task." He paused. "Unless you find the work beneath you." There was a challenge in his voice that confused her. "Nothing is beneath me, Your Grace. I am a servant in your household." Something like disappointment flickered across his face. "Yes." "Well, begin immediately. I shall return in 2 hours." Left alone among his personal papers, Florence worked methodically, trying not to absorb the contents of the letters she handled. Nevertheless, certain phrases caught her eye, expressions of condolence for his wife's death, business propositions, and increasingly, pressure from family members regarding remarriage. One letter, dated just a week prior, caused her to pause. "Vincent, I have made discreet inquiries as requested. Miss Florence Osborne is indeed the daughter of the late Colonel James Osborne, whose debts became public scandal after his death. The young lady was well received in society until then, with prospects for a respectable match. After her father's suicide, she disappeared from London circles. Her current employment in your household is most irregular given her breeding. One must question her motives for accepting such a position rather than seeking work as a governess or companion, which would be more appropriate to her station. I advise caution, dear cousin. A gentlewoman in disguise as a common servant may have ulterior designs. Yours faithfully." Edward Florence's hands trembled as she set the letter aside. The Duke had been investigating her. He knew exactly who she was, and suspected her of some scheme. The betrayal stung more sharply than it should have. What had she expected? That he had taken a genuine interest in a servant? When the Duke returned, Florence had completed organizing the correspondence, including the damning letter which she placed prominently on top of its appropriate stack. "You finished already?" He seemed surprised. "Yes, Your Grace. The letters are arranged as you requested." She stood stiffly, her voice carefully controlled. "Is there anything else you require?" He studied her face. "You seem disturbed, Miss Osborne." "It is not my place to be disturbed by anything in this household." "And yet you are." He approached the desk, his gaze falling on the letter she had deliberately exposed. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah. You read it." "I did not read your correspondence intentionally, Your Grace." "But when one sees one's own name—" "Of course." He picked up the letter, folding it deliberately. "Does it surprise you that I would inquire about someone in my household?" Florence lifted her chin. "No, Your Grace. Only that you would continue the charade of not knowing my circumstances once you discovered them." "Was it a charade?" "I never claimed ignorance of your past." "You allowed me to believe my secret was safe. Instead, you were having me investigated like a criminal." The Duke's expression hardened. "You presented yourself as a housemaid despite your breeding and education. Such deception warrants investigation." "Deception?" Florence's composure cracked. "What choice did I have?" "My father left nothing but debts and scandal. No respectable family would hire a suicide's daughter as governess to their children. I needed to eat, to have shelter. I did what was necessary for survival." "And why Fairwood Hall specifically? Of all the great houses in England, why seek employment here?" The question confused her. "I had no specific destination in mind. The agency in London arranged the position." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, then something unreadable. "You did not choose Fairwood Hall deliberately?" "No." "Why would I?" She shook her head, bewildered. "Your Grace, I have never met you before entering your service. I had no connection to this house or family." The Duke turned away, moving to the window. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I see. That is unexpected." Florence gathered her courage. "Sir, now that my background is openly acknowledged, I assume you will wish me to leave your service." He turned sharply. "Leave? Why would I dismiss my most competent librarian? Because I am not what I presented myself to be. Because a gentleman's daughter working as a housemaid creates an awkward situation that could invite gossip. Miss Osborne," he said slowly, "if I dismissed every person in this house harboring secrets, I would be left quite alone." The following morning, Florence was summoned to the housekeeper's office. Mrs. Winters regarded her with a mixture of suspicion and reluctant respect. "The Duke has instructed me to relieve you of your general housekeeping duties. Henceforth, you will serve as his library assistant and occasionally as a reader to his aunt, Lady Fairchild, who arrives next week. Your quarters will be moved to the family wing, adjacent to Lady Fairchild's rooms." The announcement left Florence speechless. Such a position, half companion, half secretary, was a remarkable elevation, particularly given the Duke's knowledge of her deception. "The Duke feels your education is being wasted on menial tasks," Mrs. Winters continued. "Though I must say, this irregular arrangement will cause talk below stairs." "I'm sure it will," Florence murmured, still processing the sudden change in her circumstances. "Your new quarters will be ready this afternoon. Nancy will assist you in moving your belongings." Florence's new room was a revelation, spacious, with a comfortable bed, a small sitting area, and a window overlooking the gardens. More shockingly, she found several dresses laid out on the bed, simple but well-made gowns more appropriate to her new position than her housemaid's uniforms. A note accompanied them. These belong to my late wife's companion. They appear to be your size. Your new position requires appropriate attire. VF. The gesture brought unexpected tears to Florence's eyes. The Duke owed her nothing, yet he had not only elevated her position but provided for her dignity as well. Lady Fairchild arrived precisely as scheduled, a formidable woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She assessed Florence with one sweeping glance as they were introduced. "So you're the mysterious Miss Osborne I've heard about. Vincent writes that you have an exceptional mind and a talent for literature." "His Grace is too kind," Florence replied, curtsying. "Vincent is rarely kind without reason." Lady Fairchild settled into a chair by the fire. "He says you're to read to me in the evenings. My eyes are not what they once were. I would be honored. We shall see if you retain that sentiment after enduring my company for a fortnight." The older woman's lips twitched. "I am told you have fallen on difficult times, Miss Osborne. The daughter of Colonel Osborne, were you not?" Florence stiffened. "Yes, my lady. I knew your mother slightly. A gentle soul. She deserved better than your father's gambling." The blunt statement startled Florence. "You knew my mother. London is smaller than one might think, particularly among certain circles." Lady Fairchild waved a hand dismissively. "Now, let us begin with Mrs. Radcliffe. I find a good Gothic novel settles the nerves after a journey." Over the following week, Florence settled into her new role. Mornings were spent in the library, afternoons organizing correspondence for the Duke, and evenings reading to Lady Fairchild. The other servants regarded her with a mixture of envy and suspicion, but Florence found unexpected contentment in work that engaged her mind. The Duke remained an enigma. Some days he engaged her in spirited debates about literature or philosophy, other times he was distant and formal. More confusing still were the moments when she would look up from her work to find him watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. One evening, after Lady Fairchild had retired, Florence returned to the library to retrieve a book she had promised to bring the next morning. She found the Duke there, a glass of brandy in his hand, staring into the fire. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I did not mean to intrude." He turned, and she was startled by the vulnerability in his expression before he schooled his features. "Miss Osborne, what brings you here at this hour?" "I promised your aunt I would bring her Wollstonecraft's Vindicationer tomorrow. I came to fetch it." His lips curved slightly. "My aunt's literary tastes grow more radical with age. She is a remarkable woman." "Indeed." He gestured to the chair opposite his. "Join me for a moment." The invitation was improper, yet Florence found herself accepting, settling carefully into the chair. The firelight cast shadows across his features, softening the angles of his face. "Are you happy here, Miss Osborne?" he asked unexpectedly. The question caught her off guard. "I am grateful for the position, Your Grace." "That is not what I asked." Florence considered her answer carefully. "Happiness has not been my primary consideration these past years. Survival has taken precedence. A pragmatic approach." He studied her face. "Yet not one that sustains the spirit indefinitely." "Perhaps not. But we cannot all afford the luxury of pursuing happiness." "No." Something like regret crossed his features. "Even those of us with means often find happiness elusive." The personal nature of the conversation made Florence uneasy. "Your Grace, May I ask a question? He nodded. Why did you change my position? You could have dismissed me when you discovered my deception. The Duke was silent for a long moment. Because talent and intelligence should not be wasted. Because circumstances of birth and fortune are often matters of chance rather than merit. Those are philosophical reasons, Florence said quietly. I wonder if there are more personal ones. His eyes met hers, and the intensity she found there made her breath catch. Perhaps there are, Miss Osborne. But those are not discussions for this hour. The next morning, Florence was helping Lady Fairchild sort through correspondence when the older woman abruptly changed the subject. My nephew watches you, you know. Florence nearly dropped the letter she was holding. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, my lady. Don't play coy, girl. It doesn't suit you. Lady Fairchild fixed her with a shrewd gaze. Vincent has not shown interest in any woman since Eliza died. Yet he follows you with his eyes when he thinks no one notices. Lady Fairchild, I assure you, oh, spare me your assurances. I'm not accusing you of impropriety. I'm merely stating facts. She set aside her correspondence. Vincent married Eliza to please his father. She was suitable in breeding and fortune, but there was no great passion between them. Her death affected him deeply, not from romantic love, but from guilt. Guilt! Florence couldn't help her curiosity. Eliza was with child when she died. Vincent had been away for months on diplomatic business. He believes if he had been present, she might have survived the childbed fever. Lady Fairchild sighed. Nonsense, of course. Women die in childbirth regardless of their husband's presence, but Vincent carries the weight of it nonetheless. Florence's heart ached for the Duke's loss. That is truly tragic. It is. But the living must continue living. Lady Fairchild pinned Florence with her gaze. You intrigue him. You challenge his mind. And unless I'm greatly mistaken, you stir something in him that has been dormant these past years. My lady, such speculation is inappropriate. I am merely an employee in this household. Are you? I wonder. Lady Fairchild smiled mysteriously. Vincent has never been conventional in his thinking. It's what makes him interesting. That afternoon, a commotion in the entrance hall announced unexpected visitors. Florence, passing through on an errand, froze at the sight of Lady Pembroke, her former employer, accompanied by her son, Mr. Thomas Pembroke, whose unwanted attentions had forced Florence to flee her previous position. She tried to slip away unnoticed, but Thomas's voice rang out. Miss Osborne! Good heavens, is that really you? All eyes turned to Florence, who had no choice but to acknowledge him with a curtsy. Mr. Pembroke. Lady Pembroke. Lady Pembroke's eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with disdain. Well, how surprising to find you here, Miss Osborne. And in what capacity, may I ask? Before Florence could respond, the Duke appeared on the stairs. Lady Pembroke. This is an unexpected pleasure. Duke Fairchild. Yes, we were passing through the area and thought to pay our respects. Lady Pembroke gestured toward Florence. I see you have employed my former companion. Indeed. Miss Osborne has proven invaluable in organizing my library and assisting my aunt. Thomas Pembroke stepped forward, his smile predatory. Miss Osborne left our household quite suddenly. Did she explain the circumstances? Florence felt the blood drain from her face. This was the moment she had feared, her past exposed, her reputation questioned, her position once again in jeopardy. The Duke's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Miss Osborne's references were impeccable. Now, shall we move to the drawing room? I believe tea has been prepared. As the group moved toward the drawing room, the Duke fell into step beside Florence. "You need not attend us," he said quietly. "In fact, I would prefer if you joined my aunt in the library. She was asking for you earlier." The dismissal, though kindly meant, stung. "Yes, your Grace." Florence retreated to the library, where Lady Fairchild was indeed waiting. The older woman took one look at Florence's pale face and demanded an explanation. "The Pembrokes are here," Florence said simply. "My former employers." Understanding dawned in Lady Fairchild's eyes. "Ah. And there is a history there, I take it." Florence hesitated, then decided honesty was her only recourse. "Mr. Thomas Pembroke made advances that I rebuffed. He became insistent. Rather than create a scandal that would damage the family's reputation, I left without explanation." "I see." Lady Fairchild's expression hardened. "And does Vincent know of this?" "No, my lady. It is not something I have discussed." "Perhaps you should." She rose from her chair with surprising agility. "Wait here." Before Florence could protest, Lady Fairchild had swept from the room. Left alone, Florence paced anxiously. The Pembrokes could easily destroy what little security she had found at Fairwood Hall. Thomas, in particular, was not a man to forgive rejection. Nearly an hour passed before the library door opened again. Florence turned, expecting Lady Fairchild, but found the Duke instead. His expression was thunderous. "Why did you not tell me about Thomas Pembroke?" Florence's heart sank. "It was not relevant to my position here." "Not relevant." He crossed the room in quick strides. "The man attempted to compromise you, and when you resisted, he forced you to flee to protect your reputation. How is that not relevant?" "How do you know that?" "My aunt has remarkable powers of persuasion, and Lady Pembroke, for all her airs, is a dreadful gossip." His voice softened. "Florence, why did you not trust me with this?" The use of her given name startled her. "Because a servant's word against a gentleman's is worthless. Because women in my position are always presumed to have invited such attention. Because I have learned that trust is a luxury I cannot afford." The Duke stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. "Then I must earn your trust. The Pembrokes have left with the clear understanding that they are not welcome to return." Florence stared at him in disbelief. "You dismissed them?" "On my account." "I did." His voice was firm. "No guest in my home will threaten or discomfort those under my protection." "Protection," she repeated, the word both comforting and somehow disappointing. The Duke studied her face. "Is that not what you want?" "What I want?" Florence faltered. What did she want? Security, yes. Respect, certainly. But in the depths of her heart, in the quiet moments when she allowed herself to dream, she wanted something far more impossible. Before she could answer, the Duke continued. "Lady Fairchild has suggested that your position be formalized not as a servant, but as her paid companion. It would be a more suitable arrangement given your background." The offer was generous, a significant improvement in her circumstances. Yet Florence felt a curious emptiness at the thought of becoming Lady Fairchild's companion, removed from daily interaction with the Duke. "That is very kind," she managed. "It is practical," he corrected. "My aunt travels extensively. You would accompany her to London for the season, to Bath for the waters. You would have opportunities to move in society again, albeit in a different capacity than before. And you think that is what I want?" to hover at the edges of a society that has already rejected me. The Duke frowned. What do you want, Florence? The directness of the question, combined with the intimate use of her name, broke something within her. What I want is irrelevant. It always has been. I learned that lesson when my father's death left me penniless and friendless. I learned it again when Thomas Pembroke's attentions forced me to choose between my virtue and my livelihood. I have spent years adapting to circumstances, accepting what I must and burying what I desire. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have left. Florence moved toward the door. I am grateful for the position with Lady Fairchild. Please convey my acceptance. 3 days later, Florence stood in the grand entrance hall as the footman loaded Lady Fairchild's trunks onto the waiting carriage. As the Duke's aunt's companion, she would be travelling to London immediately, while the Duke remained at Fairwood Hall. Lady Fairchild watched Florence with knowing eyes. "You're making a mistake, my dear. I'm accepting a generous opportunity, my lady." "Nonsense. You're running away just as surely as you ran from the Pembrokes." The older woman adjusted her gloves. "Vincent is equally stubborn. You're well matched in that regard, at least." Florence chose not to respond to the implication. The past days had been a blur of preparations for departure, during which she had seen the Duke only at meals, where he had been unfailingly polite but distant. The Duke appeared on the stairs, immaculate in riding clothes. "Aunt, your carriage is ready." "So I see." Lady Fairchild kissed his cheek. "Don't be a fool, Vincent. Life offers few second chances." He raised an eyebrow. "Safe travels, Aunt. Try not to scandalize all of London in my absence. Where would be the fun in that?" She swept toward the door, then paused. "Miss Osborne, I've forgotten my medicine case. Would you fetch it from my dressing table?" Florence hurried up the stairs, locating the small case quickly. When she returned to the entrance hall, she found Lady Fairchild already settled in the carriage and the Duke standing alone by the door. "Your aunt's medicine, your grace." She held out the case. Instead of taking it, he gestured to a footman, who collected it and carried it to the carriage. They were left alone in the entrance hall, an uncomfortable silence stretching between them. "I wish you a safe journey," he said finally. "Thank you, your grace." He hesitated, then added, "London will offer you more opportunities than Fairwood Hall." "Perhaps." "My aunt is fond of you. She will see that you are properly established in society." Florence nodded, though her heart ached at the formality between them. "She has been very kind." Another silence fell. Outside, the coachman called that they were ready to depart. "I should go," Florence said softly. The Duke nodded. "Yes." Then, just as she turned to leave, "Florence." She paused, looking back at him. "I never answered your question about why I changed your position instead of dismissing you." His eyes met hers. "The truth is, from the moment I saw you in the library that first day, I recognized something in you, a strength, an intelligence that mirrored what I value most. I did not want to lose that from my life." The admission hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither seemed ready to address. "Goodbye, your grace," Florence whispered, and hurried to the waiting carriage before her emotions betrayed her. London in the early spring of 1846 was a whirl of activity as the season approached. As Lady Fairchild's companion, Florence found herself in an odd position, neither servant nor equal, moving through society's edges with a new perspective. Lady Fairchild's reputation for eccentricity gave Florence more freedom than most companions enjoyed, allowing her to engage in conversations at small gatherings and even dance occasionally at less formal events. Lady Harrington's musical tonight, Lady Fairchild announced over breakfast one morning. Her nephew is performing. Dreadfully talented but insufferably aware of it. Florence smiled. Shall I wear the blue dress or the grey? Neither. The green. It brings out your eyes. Lady Fairchild set down her teacup. A letter arrived from Vincent this morning. He plans to join us in London next week. Florence's heart skipped a beat. Oh? I thought the Duke preferred to avoid the season. He does, generally. But apparently business requires his presence. Lady Fairchild's shrewd eye studied Florence. You've been avoiding discussion of my nephew for 6 weeks now. There is nothing to discuss, my lady. Nonsense. The air between you two practically crackled with tension before we left Fairwood Hall. She leaned forward. Florence, I'm an old woman. I have no patience for the games young people play with their hearts. It is not a game, my lady. It is reality. Florence set aside her napkin. Your nephew is a duke. I am a penniless gentleman's daughter working as a companion. There is no possible future in that equation. How depressingly conventional your thinking is. Lady Fairchild sighed. I expected better from a woman who reads Wollstonecraft. The musical that evening was well attended, the Harrington drawing-room crowded with London's elite. Florence stayed close to Lady Fairchild, helping her find a comfortable seat and fetching refreshments as needed. She was returning with a cup of punch when a familiar voice stopped her cold. Miss Osborne. What an unexpected pleasure. Thomas Pembroke stood blocking her path, his smile as predatory as she remembered. Mr. Pembroke, she acknowledged stiffly, trying to move past him. He shifted to prevent her escape. You disappeared so suddenly from Fairwood Hall. One might think you were avoiding me. I accepted a position with Lady Fairchild. Indeed. How fortunate for you. His eyes raked over her figure. You look well. Better than a former housemaid has any right to look. Florence's cheeks burned. Excuse me, sir. Lady Fairchild is waiting. The old woman can wait. He lowered his voice. You know, I've often thought about our last conversation at my mother's house. How different things might have been if you had been more accommodating. I have nothing to say to you, Mr. Pembroke. He caught her arm as she tried again to pass. Don't be hasty, Florence. Your situation is improved, but still precarious. A word from me about your time at Fairwood Hall could raise questions about your relationship with the Duke. Society loves a scandal. Remove your hand, sir. Her voice was low but firm. Miss Osborne, is this man bothering you? The new voice belonged to a tall gentleman Florence didn't recognize, handsome, with kind eyes and an air of authority. Thomas released her arm immediately. Lord Maxwell. Not at all. Miss Osborne and I are old acquaintances. Indeed? Miss Osborne seems eager to conclude your acquaintance. Lord Maxwell offered Florence his arm. I believe Lady Fairchild is looking for you. Grateful for the intervention, Florence accepted his escort. Thank you, my lord. Edward Maxwell, he introduced himself as they moved through the crowd. I recognized you as Lady Fairchild's companion. And I recognized Pembroke as the cad he is. Florence glanced at him in surprise. You know Mr. Pembroke? Unfortunately. We were at Oxford together. His reputation with women was questionable even then. Lord Maxwell smiled down at her. I'm also a friend of Vincent Fairchild. In fact, I believe I may have written to him about you some months ago. Understanding dawned. "You're the cousin who investigated me." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Guilty as charged. Though in my defense, Vincent only asked for confirmation of your identity, not for judgment of your character." They reached Lady Fairchild, who eyed Lord Maxwell with approval. "Edward. How delightful. I see you've met my Florence." "Indeed. I was just rescuing her from Thomas Pembroke's unwanted attentions." Lady Fairchild's expression darkened. "That boy needs a sound thrashing." "Thank you, Edward." She patted the seat beside her. "Join us. The music has been dreadful so far, we need pleasant conversation to compensate." Over the next hour, Florence found Lord Maxwell to be intelligent and charming, with none of the condescension she often encountered from gentlemen of his station. When he asked permission to call on Lady Fairchild the following day, his gaze lingered on Florence in a way that suggested she was the true object of his interest. "He's quite taken with you," Lady Fairchild remarked as their carriage rolled home through London's foggy streets. "He was being kind. Edward Maxwell is neither a flirt nor a fool. If he showed interest, it was genuine." Lady Fairchild studied Florence in the dim carriage light. "He would be a good match, you know. Younger son of an earl, but with his own fortune from his maternal grandfather. No title, but security and respectability." Florence looked out at the passing streets. "You sound as though you're arranging a marriage, my lady." "Merely observing possibilities." Lady Fairchild's voice softened. "You deserve happiness, Florence. Whether with Edward, or—" The unspoken alternative hung in the air between them. True to his word, Lord Maxwell called the following afternoon. His conversation was directed primarily to Florence, with just enough attention to Lady Fairchild to maintain propriety. When he left, he requested permission to escort them on a drive through Hyde Park the next day. "He's courting you," Lady Fairchild said bluntly after he departed. "That's absurd. We've just met." "Sometimes that's all it takes." The older woman's eyes grew distant. "I knew within an hour of meeting my late husband that he was the man I would marry." Over the next week, Lord Maxwell became a regular visitor. His attentions were respectful but unmistakable, and Florence found herself warming to his company. He treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, and seemed unbothered by her reduced circumstances. "His everything a sensible woman should want," Lady Fairchild observed after he had escorted them to an art exhibition. "Handsome, intelligent, kind." Florence nodded. "He is. Yet you remain hesitant." "I am cautious by necessity, my lady. Men of Lord Maxwell's standing do not typically marry penniless companions." "Edward is not typical." Lady Fairchild paused. "Vincent arrives tomorrow." The abrupt change of subject caught Florence off guard. "Yes, you mentioned he was coming to London." "He'll be staying at Fairchild House, of course. We are invited to dine there tomorrow evening." Florence's stomach tightened with anxiety. She had not seen the Duke since leaving Fairwood Hall, though his presence had never truly left her thoughts. "Perhaps I should remain here. It would be more appropriate." "Nonsense. You are my companion. Where I go, you go." Lady Fairchild's expression softened. "Besides, I think it's time certain matters were resolved, don't you?" Fairchild House was a grand London residence in Mayfair, its elegant facade illuminated by torches as Lady Fairchild's carriage arrived the following evening. Florence had dressed with particular care in a gown of deep burgundy, more formal than her usual attire, purchased at Lady Fairchild's insistence. "Remember, you are not a servant here," Lady Fairchild reminded her as they were announced. "You are my companion and a guest in this house." The Duke awaited them in the drawing-room, looking much as Florence remembered, perhaps a bit thinner, with new lines around his eyes. He greeted his aunt warmly, then turned to Florence with a formal bow. "Miss Osborne, you look well." "Thank you, Your Grace." "As do you." An awkward silence fell, broken by Lady Fairchild's exasperated sigh. "For heaven's sake, Vincent, is that how you greet someone who practically ran your household for months? I've raised you better than that." The Duke's lips twitched. "Forgive me, Aunt. The journey from Hampshire has left me somewhat fatigued." He turned to Florence with a softer expression. "It is good to see you, Miss Osborne. London agrees with you." Before Florence could respond, the butler announced another arrival, Lord Edward Maxwell. The Duke's expression flickered with surprise as Lord Maxwell entered. "Edward, I wasn't aware you were joining us." "Last-minute invitation from Lady Fairchild," Lord Maxwell explained, bowing to the ladies. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Lady Fairchild said with suspicious cheerfulness. "The more the merrier." Throughout dinner, Florence was acutely aware of the Duke's gaze repeatedly finding her across the table. Lord Maxwell, seated beside her, was attentive as always, but there was a new tension in the air that had not been present in their previous encounters. After the meal, Lady Fairchild declared herself tired and suggested that Lord Maxwell escort her to the music room, leaving Florence and the Duke alone in the dining room. "My aunt is many things, but subtle is not among them," the Duke observed dryly. Florence managed a small smile. "She means well." "Does she?" He studied Florence's face. "I understand you and Edward have become acquainted." "Lord Maxwell has been very kind since our introduction. Edward is a good man." The Duke's voice was carefully neutral. "One of the best I know, in fact." "Yes, he seems so." The Duke rose from his chair, moving to the window that overlooked the darkened garden. "He would make an excellent husband." The statement hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Florence's heart beat faster as she tried to interpret his tone. "Is that why you came to London, Your Grace?" "To approve Lord Maxwell's suit." He turned to face her, his expression guarded. "I came because my aunt's letters suggested I was needed here." "For what purpose?" "She implied that certain matters required my personal attention." His eyes held hers. "Including you, Miss Osborne." Florence's breath caught. "Me?" The Duke took a step toward her, then stopped, as if restraining himself. "My aunt believes I have been a fool." "Perhaps she is right." "I don't understand." "Don't you?" Another step closer. "Florence, when you left Fairwood Hall, you took something with you that I have been unable to recover." Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "What did I take?" "Peace." The word was soft but intense. "Before you arrived, I had resigned myself to a solitary existence, buried in books and duty. You disrupted that resignation. You made me want." He trailed off, and Florence found herself moving toward him, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. "Want what?" "More." His gaze was direct now, stripped of pretense. "A life that includes conversation that challenges my mind. Laughter that lightens my spirit. A companion who sees beyond the title to the man beneath." "Your Grace." "Vincent," he corrected softly. "My name is Vincent." "Vincent," she whispered, testing the intimacy of it. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I have spent 6 weeks trying to convince myself that your departure was for the best. That the feelings I developed were inappropriate and best forgotten. That the difference in our stations makes any deeper connection impossible. He shook his head. I failed utterly in all three endeavours. Florence trembled at the confession. Society would never accept such a connection. Society, he said with unexpected fierceness, has never dictated my heart's choices, only my public obligations. I fulfilled those obligations with my first marriage. I married for duty and title. If I marry again, it will be for myself alone. The word marry hung between them, electric with possibility. Florence struggled to maintain her composure. You speak of impossibilities. Do I? He reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth through her veins. Florence, when I first discovered your true identity, I suspected you had sought employment at Fairwood Hall deliberately, perhaps hoping to improve your circumstances through my interest. I would never, I know that now. And the realization humbled me. You came to my home by chance, worked honestly despite your reduced circumstances, and never once sought advantage from our connection. His fingers tightened around hers. Your integrity, your intelligence, your strength in adversity, these are worth more to me than any dowry or social connection. Florence fought against the hope rising within her. Vincent, you cannot mean, I mean exactly what you fear to hear. He lifted her hand to his lips. I love you, Florence Osborne. I want you as my wife, my duchess, my companion in all things. The declaration stole her breath. The scandal would be enormous. Let it be. His eyes burned with certainty. Unless your heart lies elsewhere? Edward, Lord Maxwell is a kind man, but my heart has been elsewhere since the day you caught me falling from a library ladder. Florence's voice shook with emotion. I never allowed myself to hope, to even imagine, then imagine now. He drew her closer. Imagine waking each morning in our library, surrounded by books we both love. Imagine conversations by firelight that last until dawn. Imagine a partnership of minds and hearts that defies convention. Tears filled Florence's eyes. You paint a beautiful picture. It can be our reality. He touched her cheek gently. If you'll have me. Yes, she whispered, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 dreams she had never dared to acknowledge. Yes, I will have you, Vincent Fairchild, with all the scandal and whispers that may come. His smile transformed his face, erasing the gravity that had marked it since their first meeting. Then let them whisper. We shall give them something worth talking about. When they entered the music room hand in hand, Lady Fairchild took one look at their faces and smiled triumphantly. Lord Maxwell, observing from beside the pianoforte, inclined his head with a knowing smile. It seems congratulations are in order, he said smoothly. I suspected as much when Vincent nearly knocked over his wine every time Miss Osborne spoke at dinner. You're not disappointed? Florence asked, concerned. Lord Maxwell laughed. My dear Miss Osborne, while I admire you greatly, I came to London with explicit instructions from Vincent to protect Florence from unwanted suitors while he settled affairs at Fairwood Hall. I may have exceeded my mandate somewhat, but my intentions were always to serve as guardian rather than suitor. Florence turned to Vincent in astonishment. You arranged for Lord Maxwell to watch over me. I worried about Pembroke, he admitted. And I needed time to make certain preparations at Fairwood Hall before coming to claim you properly. Lady Fairchild cackled with delight. Oh, this is better than I hoped. Conspiracy and romance, how delicious. The wedding took place 3 months later at Fairwood's private chapel, attended only by Lady Fairchild, Lord Maxwell, and a few trusted servants. London society buzzed with the scandal of a duke marrying his former housemaid, but the whispers faded when the couple departed for an extended tour of the continent. When they returned to Fairwood Hall the following spring, Florence entered not as a servant but as its mistress. As she stood in the grand entrance hall where she had once carried linens and dusted ornaments, Vincent took her hand. "Welcome home, Duchess." Florence smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought her from desperate servitude to this moment of belonging. "It seems impossible still. That I arrived here as a servant, never dreaming that I had already chosen you." Vincent finished, drawing her into his arms. "Perhaps some things are written in the stars, my love, beyond even our understanding." "Perhaps," she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Or perhaps we simply found in each other what we most needed, truth, acceptance, and the courage to defy the world for love." In the library that evening, as rain pattered against the windows much as it had on the day of her arrival, Florence curled beside her husband on the same sofa where they had first truly spoken. On the table before them lay a leather-bound journal, her wedding gift to him, filled with the story of how a desperate young woman had arrived at Fairwood Hall seeking mere survival and found, against all odds, a love that transformed her life. "I came with nothing," she murmured against his shoulder. "And found everything," he replied, turning the pages of their story. "As did I."